If you stepped through the heavy wooden doors of a British secondary school in the early 1960s, you would not have found a place designed to nurture self-expression or explore personal identity. You would have entered a building that smelled faintly of chalk dust, floor polish, damp wool coats, and ink. A place that felt less like an extension of childhood and more like an introduction to adulthood. School did not exist to ask you who you wanted to become. It existed to prepare you for what you were expected to become. And many of the subjects British children learned in those classrooms would feel almost unrecognizable today. Not because they were rare, but because they were completely ordinary. Number 1. Woodwork with real tools. By the time boys reached 11 or 12 years old, many found themselves standing in a woodwork room that felt more like a workshop than a classroom, surrounded by long benches carved with the initials of generations before them. The air carried the thick, comforting smell of fresh timber and machine oil, and lined neatly along the walls were saws, chisels, mallets, planes, and clamps. Not miniature teaching versions, not blunted replicas, but proper tools, heavy in the hand and sharp enough to demand respect. There was no dramatic speech about danger, no extended discussion about safety awareness. You were shown how to hold the saw correctly, how to measure twice before cutting, how to keep your fingers clear, and then you were expected to get on with it. If you cut the wood unevenly, you did not receive encouragement for effort. You received another piece of timber and a quiet reminder to concentrate. A splinter in your thumb was not treated as trauma. It was removed and you carried on. For many boys, this was the first time school felt serious in a physical way. The first time a mistake could be felt immediately rather than marked in red ink days later. Today, the idea of handing a 12-year-old a sharpened chisel without layers of supervision would make many parents uneasy. In the 1960s, it was simply considered preparation. Number 2. Metalwork and machines that felt industrial. If woodwork introduced you to craft, metalwork introduced you to industry. The metalwork room was colder, louder, and less forgiving. There were vices bolted to benches, steel sheets stacked against walls, and in some schools, even small lathes humming quietly under fluorescent lights. The smell was different too, sharper, more mechanical, a mixture of oil, iron filings, and heated metal. Children of 12 or 13 were expected to file edges until they were smooth, to measure precisely, to drill straight and true. If a hole was even slightly misaligned, the entire piece could be rendered useless. It was not treated as creative exploration, it was treated as training. There was an unspoken understanding that some of these boys would leave school at 15 or 16 and enter factories, workshops, and apprenticeships. The classroom reflected that future. Very few modern schools would allow early teenagers to work this closely with industrial tools. But in Britain during the 1960s, it was not considered risky. It was considered responsible. Number 3. Domestic science as a serious life skill. While boys often found themselves in workshops, many girls were directed toward domestic science, and the tone of that subject was rarely playful. The domestic science room did not resemble a television baking show set. It felt like a training ground for adult life. There were ovens built into tiled walls, long counters for chopping and mixing, sinks with stiff brushes and drying racks, and cupboards filled with flour, sugar, tins, and basic household staples. You were not told you were expressing creativity. You were told you were learning how to run a household properly. You learned how to make pastry that did not collapse, how to prepare a balanced meal within a strict budget, how to iron a shirt so that the creases sat sharp and deliberate. And if your sponge cake sank in the middle, The lesson was not about artistic interpretation. It was about following instructions accurately. Today, cooking is often framed as a hobby or lifestyle choice. In the 1960s, it was presented as competence, something every future adult would require. Number 4. Sewing, darning, and repairing clothes. Clothing in 1960s. Britain was not disposable, and schools reflected that reality in their curriculum. Children were taught how to sew, not for decoration, but for maintenance. They learned how to attach buttons securely, how to stitch hems invisibly, how to mend small tears before they became large ones. The quiet concentration of a sewing lesson felt different from the noise of woodwork, yet the seriousness was the same. You were expected to produce neat, even stitches, not because it was charming, but because your family might genuinely rely on those skills. A 12-year-old girl could be graded not on imagination, but on whether her seam would hold under strain. In a world where fast fashion now encourages replacement over repair, it is almost startling to remember that children once left school knowing how to extend the life of their own clothes. Number 5. Technical drawing with absolute precision. Technical drawing required a different kind of patience, the kind that came from stillness rather than strength. Large drawing boards leaned against desks, and pupils used rulers, compasses, protractors, and sharpened pencils to create exact diagrams of objects, buildings, and mechanical parts. A line was either straight or it was not. An angle was either correct or it was wrong. There was no room for interpretation. You learned to erase carefully so that the page remained clean. You learned to measure twice before committing to ink. The classroom would often fall into near silence, broken only by the faint scrape of pencil against paper. Today, digital tools have replaced hand-drawn drafts in most contexts. In the 1960s, children were expected to master precision by hand. Number 6. Typing on manual machines. In certain schools, particularly for girls preparing for clerical roles, typing was introduced as a structured and disciplined subject. Rows of heavy manual typewriters sat on desks, their metal frames cold to the touch, keys resistant under small fingers. You were taught to sit upright, wrists raised, fingers curved over the home row. The room filled with the clatter of keys striking ribbon and paper, a mechanical rhythm that left little space for distraction. Mistakes were not erased with a tap. They were corrected painstakingly, or the entire page was started again. Typing was not casual, it was vocational, and it was treated with the same seriousness as mathematics. Number 7. Practical arithmetic for real life. Mathematics in the 1960s classroom often felt closely tied to everyday survival. Children learned how to calculate change quickly without calculators, how to measure fabric for curtains, how to estimate quantities of materials, how to divide wages into rent, food, and bills. Mistakes mattered because in the real world, mistakes cost money. The blackboard would be filled with numbers, and pupils copied them down carefully, knowing that speed and accuracy were equally valued. It was not abstract mathematics for theoretical exploration, it was preparation for adult life. Number 8. Religious instruction as part of the day. The school day often began with assembly, hymns sung in echoing halls, scripture readings delivered in steady voices, and moral lessons woven seamlessly into routine. Religious instruction was not debated, it was embedded. Children memorized prayers, recited passages, and absorbed a moral framework that extended beyond academic subjects. Whether deeply devout or merely compliant, pupils participated as part of the rhythm of schooling. Modern classrooms in Britain are far more secular. In the 1960s, faith and education were closely linked. Number 9. Drill and structured physical training. Physical education was not always about games and fun. In many schools, it resembled drill, lines of children moving in synchrony, arms raised, feet aligned, voices quiet. Gymnasiums smelled of varnished wood and rope. Climbing frames reached high. Vaulting horses stood firm and intimidating. You were expected to try, to push through discomfort, to finish the exercise. There was little discussion of preference. Strength and coordination were built through repetition. Number 10. Early preparation for employment. Perhaps the most defining subject of all was not a single lesson, but the direction of education itself. By 14 or 15, many children were steered firmly toward employment. Subjects narrowed, expectations sharpened. You were prepared not for exploration, but for function. Reliability, punctuality, competence, these were the invisible goals behind every timetable. Childhood, in many ways, was already fading by the time you entered your mid-teens. Looking back, it is easy to judge these subjects as rigid or outdated. Yet, for the generation who sat at those desks, they felt logical. School was not about endless possibility. It was about readiness. You were not asked what you dreamed of becoming. You were taught what you would need to survive. And perhaps the most striking difference is this. Many British children in the 1960s left school knowing how to build a shelf, mend a jumper, type a formal letter, calculate a wage packet, and cook a meal from scratch. Whether that made them better prepared or simply shaped by necessity is a question still debated today. But what cannot be denied is that classrooms once looked and felt very different from the ones we know now.